No matter how many times I hear Halo of Flies by Alice Cooper, it still gets me just like the first time. We're at KQAS 460. It is a drizzly, dreary April afternoon here today, but that's not going to stop us from playing all the tunes you may need to get you through your workday. As a special treat to our listeners, as a result of intern Stacy forgetting to reach out to our ad partners, we actually have no ads for this next hour of programming. You guys are going to be able to hear nothing but tunes uninterrupted with no worries at all. And sorry, someone's entering the booth. Can I help? Listeners, there's a woman here with monarch butterfly earrings, and she's holding a giant sign that says, "I have an advertisement. Don't read this." Oh, she doesn't want me to read it out loud. Okay, she's passing me a note with a stack of $100 bills. Wow, this is remarkably bad handwriting on remarkably nice cardstock. Do you have Beanie Babies? I want them. I don't care what you want me to pay for them. I want them. Especially special editions. I want them. Give me the Beanie Babies. I need them. My life will be incomplete without them. To find me, just make your way over to the derelict shipping warehouse on East 146th Street and 7th Avenue, and I will take them from you. I don't know what the hell that was, listeners, but we now have an ad, I suppose. And as we move into the 12 o'clock hour, I'm sorry, I just need a second to... As we move into the 12 o'clock hour, we are going to be starting with Man in a Box by Alice in Chains. So enjoy some grunge to match that Seattle weather we're all experiencing here in New York City. Hello, and thank you for joining us in Mapping the Zone, a podcast dedicated to a highly fixated review of large, dense books, specifically of the works and context of Thomas Pynchon, at least for the foreseeable future anyway. My name is Kate, and I'm one of the co-hosts.
My name is Cody.
And I'm Will.
Unfortunately, Luke is not going to be able to be with us this week or next week, so it'll just be the three of us for these next two episodes. But he will be rejoining us after that. And this week we are going to be talking about chapters 4 through 6 of Bleeding Edge.
Hi, this is Will, just dropping in from the future to deliver the customary summaries. After Ziggy gets home from Krav Maga and dinner has been finished, Maxine checks in on the three of them beta testing Fiona's father's business partner's Valentine to New York. This being a radically bloodless anti-gentrification first-person shooter, which even the principally anti-shooter Maxine cannot find intolerance for. In fact, she is shocked to find herself enjoying the experience of humanely neutralizing the yuppies destroying her city with their thoughtless cultural violence. When Virva finally arrives to take Fiona off their hands, they catch up a bit, and we and Maxine hear vagaries about her husband's main software project, Deep Archer, but more importantly, about the interest other businesses and even the government have expressed in purchasing its source code. As we and Maxine expected eventually, this leads back to discussing hash slingers, who've begun floating offers. Thrilled by the prospects and the buzz of negotiations, Verva's excitement is dampened by the annoyance of the bickering programming partners, her husband, Justin, and Lucas. Typical hackers, they can't seem to decide between sharing the code with the world and taking the payout, and Verva can at least get behind taking time to make the decision. Once she departs with daughter in tow, Otis lets the shoe drop. She's a Beanie Baby investor. Between that and some vibes Maxine picked up earlier, it's clear that Verva's motives are less wholesome than she let on. Chapter 5. A sort of fraud-detecting montage brings us from Hashslinger's books to an evacuated office formerly housing the now-defunct web design startup Hugar.com, which seems to still be receiving funds from Gabriel Ice's juggernaut. There, Maxine meets a former temp, current internet line squatter, Driscoll Paget, and is impressed by her deep situational awareness, as well as her haircut. They exchange impressions of the dot-com crash and its cohort, particularly Ice, with mutually escalating degrees of honesty. Eventually, they end up drinking Zima at a bar down the street. With the lubrication that comes with such decadent nostalgia, Driscoll reveals her personal theories about the chances of another Gulf War and the impossibility of any revenge of the nerds. Before long, she's explaining the depths of her dedication to mimicking Jennifer Aniston, the hair being only the tip of that iceberg, and Maxine can't help but refer her to the salon of Murray and Morris, who, despite having once convinced her to pretend that a dying chicken facial mask would revitalize her looks, she noted seemed to be increasingly popular amongst donners of the Rachel. Driscoll starts to bemoan the tidal recession of web groupies that used to ebb and flow around her life as a hot tech freelancer before the crash, and they both spot a pair of guys eyeing them. A bit too straight-laced for the insightful duo of fast friends, they split up to figure out who's the target. As Maxine attempts to lose them in the street, trying to be glad that it isn't Driscoll who's in danger, she's worried about what it means for a tail to be on her this early in the investigation. Chapter 6. At the dinner table sometime later, the boys excitedly tell Maxine about this really crazy lady, Marge Kelleher, who'd spoken at their school assembly that day. As it turns out, not only does Maxine know her from renters' strikes back in her youth, but her parents know her from the Reagan-era demonstrations, too. Suffice to say, as Otis and Ziggy hear it then, she's always been sort of political. Finding out that she'd be the commencement speaker for the graduation to come, Maxine writes down a reminder to attend. After another ambiguous passage of time, Reg reappears with intel. He's been meeting his man on the subway, and it turns out that this hacker for hire, name of Eric, has discovered that whatever maniacs set up Hashslinger's security systems, they wanted to make a game of it. Reg shares rumors saying that Gabriel Ice handles that himself, out of fear of a repeat of a hazy scenario, including hidden open terminals, leaked code, and a lost Navy contract. Well, Eric can't tell if Ice is just generally playful in a sort of way that only registers as fun from the perspective of ownership, or if he's been found out in particular. Either way, paranoia is a given. Along with the CD containing the intel that Eric has provided, Reg leaves Maxine with the announcement of his likely departure from the city. He insists it's for his family. In further pursuit of knowledge regarding Regard.com, Maxine tracks down an investor, a venture capital firm named after everybody's favorite line from everybody's favorite Journey hit. There she meets with Rocky Slajot, who immediately tests her character by offering his mother's pepper and egg sandwich, only to immediately reveal that it was a plastic joke pepper and egg sandwich. After she clocks his almost absurd degree of openness with this random person, and he clocks the pointedness of her inquiries, they get down to brass tacks. First of all, Rocky reveals that Ice's maneuvers aren't as discreet as one may presume. It's commonplace boardroom rumor that he makes a habit of investing in doomed-to-fail startups and uses their soon-to-be cadavers to pass money around. Second, he and his lovely honey Cornelia have had dinner on a few occasions with Ice. The way Slajot tells it, he's no winner, with running up the check having seemed to be his primary goal both evenings. Over this exchange, they hit it off well enough for him to make their professional relationship official, check and all, and despite her unvoiced but confident reservations, he takes her to lunch. At the nearby Enrico's, they share a bottle of Sicilian Red and speculate on the origins of hash slingers, Maxine pointing toward the feds, but this well may just have run dry.
What did we think about these 3 chapters?
I rather enjoyed them, more so than the first 3, I think. I think there's a lot more of, obviously there's a lot more of the sort of playing with the detective novel aspects in these, especially in 5 and 6. But I also feel like this is where it really shifts more into, I don't want to say typical Pynchon, but it's more of his idiosyncrasies and his stylistic flourishes are in these chapters, I think. And so it makes it more, it kind of gives it a more familiar feel. It makes it feel more like, this is a Pynchon book now. Not that the first 3 didn't have that. I just think it really becomes more evident in these chapters. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. There's a lot of really great dialogue between characters that I really, really enjoyed. And we get some new characters introduced in here, specifically Rocky, who might be my favorite character. So there's
Pynchon loves a stereotypical mobster.
He does, and he does it well. So yeah, I think there's a lot to talk about, but I think it was overall I had a really good time reading these chapters. I caught myself last night when I was finishing it up. I finished chapter 6 and got like halfway through chapter 7 and realized like I needed to stop because we weren't talking about those chapters. I just got so hooked into the story again. So yeah, I really enjoy it.
Will, what about you?
Yeah, I really love the shift into a more plot than stage setting. As we discussed last week, I was not a huge fan of that, despite it not being a problem. But I love the way that, in general, this isn't special to Bleeding Edge. Like Cody says, this is more of a common Pynchon thing. But I love the return, after the I guess, intro mission of the slip sliding around in time and the more of a panoramic view of things. And the way that the actual plot is set up here, I think, is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I would say my favorite aspect of these 3 chapters is the way that the kind of investigation starts to unfold. There are a lot of investigators in Pynchon's work. To a certain degree, almost everybody is a detective of some kind or knows a detective of some kind in his books. But this feels like the book of his that is most closely akin to actually watching someone like do an investigation, and the way that sort of each layer of it in these 3 chapters in particular like slowly unfolds and things start to connect together is really great. Whereas in a lot of cases, with like Inherent Vice being the most sort of clean comparison I can think of to this, people come to Doc, and Doc like just keeps hearing from other people what's going on. But in this case, it's actually Maxine kind of like really, really getting out there and like working the shoe leather to try and figure things out and sort of start to piece these things together, which is what I really like about this character as a protagonist. She's not only this like, I would say pretty successful mother in the fact that she takes care of her own kids and then also the McElmo's child, but also that she, on top of that, has like a fairly seemingly successful private business and is a very intelligent woman and is self-possessed enough to sort of go into these events where she's going to need to investigate something potentially suspicious and like know how to work the different angles, know how to communicate with people to get the access to what she needs, and then also how to like lose people, as she does at one point in these 3 chapters. I don't think Doc Sportello would ever be able to lose a tail. I'm pretty sure that he would just get arrested and beaten up again.
Yeah.
So this is really an example of like part of the reason why I like this character so much is like these genuine investigator qualities that she has, and how competent she does appear to be at her job. And I just love that. I love it so much. I love watching these different sort of pieces of a case, whether it's in a book or a movie or a stage play, whatever the medium. I just love seeing those elements come together, and you kind of start to get some of that here.
Yeah, and I think that was a great line that you drew between this and Inherent Vice, because I think that's, obviously they're the two most comparable in terms of the most directly that Pynchon has played with the genre, in that it's the main character is the detective. You could maybe make the argument for Lot 49, but I think in that case, Oedipa was more of an unwilling detective who was kind of thrown into it. But I think the main difference, as you mentioned, between Doc and Maxine, Doc stumbles into the answers that he needs, and like you said, people come to him. Maxine is good at her job and knows how to get information and where to look and how to do things. She's more seasoned, so it's a really interesting kind of comparison between the two. And yeah, I love that about Maxine. I think she's a fantastic character, and as we get through the story, we see that more and more. Her skills as both a detective and a mother are sharpened throughout the story.
Doc at sometimes is like almost an unwilling participant in his own life from a standpoint of the way that things happen to him. Like, I'm pretty sure he would be fine if he just hung out on Gordita Beach all day and like smoked weed and like hung out with Sortilege and Dinas, but is forced into these circumstances simply because he has the misfortune of like crossing paths with a lot of people who are in trouble. Whereas like you said, Cody, like Maxine has those abilities and actually is good at what she does and goes for it.
Yeah, and there was one description in particular that you used there, Kate. Self-possession. This has to be, unless you count, I guess, Stencil from V, the most self-possessed protagonist, or rough main character of any of his novels. You could even, Dixon might be the next closest, but even he just kind of drifts through life. And
That's
everyone
true.
else, they might think they have self-possession. They might think they have, like, goals and principles, but they never really demonstrate it as anything other than a coping mechanism. And the tension between Maxine's self and the influences around her, I think, are really very rich to mine, I guess, in this book.
Yeah, that's really well stated. So, getting into the content of chapter 4, we open up with an appointment that Maxine has with her emo therapist. And I think it's really funny how in so many of Pynchon's books, his clear contempt for the popularization of like Eastern medicine and like woo-woo spiritualism as a capitalistic endeavor it's great to always see that come up. I love this description of her emo therapist, where it says the bio on his website refers vaguely to Himalayan wanderings and political exile. But despite claims to an ancient wisdom beyond earthly limits, a 5-minute investigation reveals Sean's only known journey to the east to have been by Greyhound, from his native Southern California to New York, and not that many years ago. A losing-year high school dropout and compulsive surfer who has taken a certain amount of board-inflicted head trauma while setting records at several beaches for wipeouts in a season, Sean has in fact never been closer to Tibet than television broadcasts of Martin Scorsese's Kundun, 1997. Yet he continues to pay an exorbitant rent on this place, and his closet full of 12 identical black Armani suits speaks less to spiritual authenticity than to a gullibility otherwise seldom observed among New Yorkers able to afford his fees. It's just a great description all around of just like a grifter, and that space is filled with so many of them.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that Maxine is a fraud investigator, but spends a lot of time around grifters in one way or another. Like her therapist is a grifter. Her hairdressers, as we told later in these chapters, they're also doing a grift. Like, she's so immersed in the world of fraud examination that she can't keep herself from like ingratiating with people committing fraud, even in her personal life, which I love.
Yeah, I think her emo therapist, which I love that word.
It's such a weird term.
It really is. It does not have a good mouthfeel at all. But I think he's a prime example of, and this comes up a lot in these chapters, I noticed, and obviously in all of his books, but this disdain that Pynchon has for this late stage capitalism and the way that everything becomes commoditized. And it really, I think we talked about this a lot in Vineland because that was kind of the start of a lot of this. But it really hit another sort of peak in the late 90s and early 2000s where you had situations like this, like these guys who, and I guys and women too. I mean, anybody who was just capable of presenting themselves as something that they were absolutely not, to make a quick buck, fooled a bunch of people and made a bunch of money off of it, have no sense of remorse for doing what they did. And I mean, there's the late 90s were just so contaminated by those kind of people, and it was really gross to see, especially when you could see through it and so many other people were just buying into it. Like Miss Cleo comes to mind. Like that's a prime example of that kind of thing, and that whole quote unquote fortune telling business that we're running 800 numbers back in the 90s and just making so much money on an obviously fraudulent scheme that everyone just fell into because they presented themselves in this way that made them seem as though they were something else. And Sean's just a prime example of that. And a lot of it did revolve around Eastern philosophy and using that and kind of corrupting the sort of wholesome nature of it and bastardizing it into this really gross thing that it really hasn't been able to escape.
Yeah. I mean, even to this day, like it's not in a fever pitch anymore, but what is interesting is like the way that it's turned more into just a mainstream thing of people being spiritual but not religious, or ingratiating with those alternative methods of spirituality, still in a capitalistic way. I mean, the amount of like crystal stores or tarot readers or anything like that, it's still there, but it's not being promoted on a wide scale on television or anything like that because too many of them got caught scamming.
Yeah. Well, they all moved to the internet.
That's also true. You don't need that anymore. Go ahead, Will.
Well, so I mean, and it's one thing for it to be like Madame Cleo. That's her name.
Yeah.
Sorry, Madame Cleo.
Well, yeah, I'm a little too young. I've heard the name, but I just don't remember specifics. I'm 10 years old. Anyway, even with those, it's pretty easy to see through the scam. The hilarity in this scene to me comes from the fact that Sean is not even trying.
No. Oh yeah, no, not at all.
He's wearing black Armani suits. He's renting office space in a high-rise, and he's wearing not a Rolex or an Omega, but a pretty conspicuous consumption-y watch. Like the degrees of obvious hypocrisy are unignorable. And then you have his primary contribution to this scene in terms of conversation be just straight up anti-Islamic bigotry.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Not even subtle about it either.
And it's not even couched. It is technically couched, but it's obviously he just doesn't like Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, completely. Well, and I think to a certain degree, and I'm not necessarily saying that Pynchon was doing this purposefully. Maybe he was, but in certain ways, in the hypocritical way that you're pointing out, Will, it mirrors like all these stupid .com companies of these people who are pretending to be some kind of like radical revolutionary, but when you go to their offices, there's a bunch of people high on air duster, or they're like, they're doing these crazy, parties like Josh Harris did with Pseudo, or, they're doing things that have no actual purpose, Razorfish, or, these different companies that existed back then, seemingly for no reason other than that they could make money pretending to be doing something, which is essentially exactly what this guy's doing here. I'm not saying that Pynchon was making an obvious connection there, but it's definitely the same kind of grift that a lot of these yuppies engaged in.
Yeah.
The whole of his career, he's been criticizing the establishment of any form of like psychotherapy or modern medicine.
Yeah.
And this is just one of those situations where he's very easily able to intersect those criticisms with those of like modern day televangelists.
Yeah, completely. And the interesting thing to me is that what I noticed in these 3 chapters more than anything else, and perhaps this is as good a time as I need to bring this up, is he's setting up like a real dichotomy between yuppies and wasps, where like the yuppies are like taking over, previous like establishments that you would maybe more so associate with wasps, like talking about tearing down these old like regal buildings that you might associate more with like old money, and trying to build something new out of it. And this idea that like within this book's world, like there, as I used in the first episode, this wasp apparatus exists that controls the money and the power in the country, and does 9/11, versus this young, kind of stupid, materialistic, consumer class that just simply has more money than other people and is interested in tearing down those old buildings and putting up these high rises, is more interested in creating these pointless tech companies to make money, rather than going into politics or working at a law firm or going to Princeton and things like that. Like it is interesting to me, and I'll note these couple of instances as we go through the episode here that I showed it, but that he is building this case of maybe a idea that late stage capitalism has the ability to infect everyone, even the 1%, in these ideas of pointless pursuits or pointless shows of wealth or grifts, like using psychotherapy or the things that he has criticized in the past to simply be able to buy Armani suits and to be able to rent this high-rise buildings office space, when in reality sort of the old money world used capitalism as a way to get money for themselves, to expand their own power or do something beyond just simply the pursuit of capital. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's something that I noted in this particular set of chapters is coming up time and time again.
It makes a lot of sense to me, and it raises a question, which is, given how much of this book, most of the narration, is deeply rooted in Maxine's perspective, is that meant to be a real sort of dichotomy, like in, per se, Gravity's Rainbow, with the preterite and the elect? Or is it supposed to be just a perceived one? And also, that goes for the preterite and elect distinction as well. But is it a symbol of Maxine's internalized anti-Semitism in some degrees, the way that she kind of, not to a large extent, she's not an idiot, but the degrees to which she does hold to these old WASP establishments in higher regard than the new yuppie establishments, when they are functionally the same degree of hollowness.
I think that in some ways Maxine is meant to kind of represent. I think you're onto something there, certainly about the elect versus the preterite. What I think is interesting is that if I'm reading Maxine's age correctly, she's probably a Gen Xer, which means that she's too young to be one of these old waspy folks, but can appreciate kind of the money and the power that they have and the influence that they have, given that that is mostly the boomer generation. But she's also a bit too young to be one of these yuppie.com people. So she hangs in the middle where she can appreciate something like the WASP apparatus and the establishment there. But when she plays the video game created by Virva's husband, she's easily swayed into enjoying it, to the point where she says like, wow, that was a lot easier than I expected, or something along that line. So I think she's meant to be sort of a litmus test for the audience of this tension where one can go in either direction based upon the influence or the presentation they have around them.
That seems like a pretty good way to parse it, yeah.
So, speaking of his anti-Islamic sentiment, as you mentioned, he does mention in here that 2 colossal statues of the Buddha were destroyed that were in a sandstone cliff near Bamiyan, Afghanistan. That's a real piece of history that actually happened. The Taliban, after they kicked the Soviets out of Afghanistan, along with the help of the U.S. government, took over the country and began, to be the actual ruling force in that country. And interestingly enough, this is real history that I knew about, but like I didn't research, how they went about it or anything like that. It took them weeks of constant shelling and TNT and like repeated bombings after bombings after bombings to try and get rid of these things. And the fascinating thing is that a lot of people assume that it was done because of just like, we hate other, cultures, we hate other religions, like the emo therapist is saying. But I found a quote here from the Mullah Omar, who was the one who ordered them destroyed. And what he actually said was, I did not want to destroy the Bamiyan Buddha. In fact, some foreigners came to me and said they'd like to conduct repair work of the Bamiyan Buddha that had been slightly damaged due to rain. This shocked me. I thought, these callous people have no regards for thousands of living human beings, the Afghans dying of hunger, but they are so concerned about the non-living objects like the Buddha. This was extremely deplorable. That is why I ordered its destruction. Had they come for humanitarian work, I would have never ordered the Buddha's destruction. So, like, even within the context of him just being racist, there is, and that interview was conducted in 2010. So Thomas Pynchon would have been able to actually like have access to that quote. There is significantly more depth to why those statues were destroyed. I'm not saying it was a good idea, but it was done out of like an anger at the fact that they were not receiving the support that they needed as a nation after this horrific war, and were looking to just sort of get rid of it for that reason. Whether or not you want to trust that that's the reason they did it, that's really up to you. It could be a PR thing that he was saying that rather than the real reason, whatever it may be. But the real history there is far more complicated than this emo therapist is letting on, which is a pretty accurate depiction of what anti-Islamic sentiment is, even to this day.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
Yeah, and I this is a complete tangent, so probably do what you will with it, Cody. But what's funny about that reasoning is that it's entirely congruous with the Islamic rules about iconography. That motivation for destroying them is like very much rooted into the idea that you cannot draw saints or any symbols of holy objects because it's something that people will confuse for the real holy thing. And so I mean it's one of those things where the way I hear it, there's no difference, there's no dichotomy there. The political is the spiritual in that context.
Well, when your ruling government is a caliphate, yeah, the political is the spiritual for sure.
Well, but not just that, but even on the political, the layer of like essentially revenge, like you framed there, like it's fascinating the way that worked out.
Yeah, 100%. After she reels from this statement, which I do love the way that she says, isn't there something, Maxine gently recalls, about if the Buddha is in your way on the path to enlightenment, it's okay to kill him? It's like she's trying to do what she can to push back against it. But we later get another reference to the fact that this person is from California. There's also something weird about everyone in this book from California being like dead inside or having like some aspect of their soul like sucked out, because it says at the bottom of page 31, vacant, perhaps only Californian. The universe is a joke, but you don't get its smile, which so often drives her to the Buddhist daydream seething with rage. Like he it could just be that Pynchon, after living there, hated it a lot, but I think that yeah, go ahead, Cody.
I was going to say maybe I think maybe he just hated what it became. I think if you trace it back to when he left, was around that time that it started. It became less of the the home of the counterculture movement and more of the kind of bloated shell of Hollywood excess and just general insincerity. So I think that's kind of like, I think a lot of that anger kind of shines through in this book. He's able to look back at it and just kind of vent his frustration with what became of what he called home for so long.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, but between that kind of obvious biographical aspect and the jumping back to Vineland, the fact that he basically explicitly says that the redwood forests are the land of the dead, I think crossing that with the kind of the tradition in the Western genre, which, just to remember, it wasn't too long prior to this book's authorship that he was working on Against the Day, a lot of which is very much rooted in Western conventions. That kind of symbolism of fencing and the ways that the fences kind of encroached on the freedom that implies America, and the way that California in that Western tradition is viewed as kind of the epitome of that enclosure.
Yeah, true. And I mean, if we're talking too about like the connection between, Silicon Alley being where the .com boom was in New York, there's also, Silicon Valley, which is where a lot of these companies end up going, the ones who survived, that or Seattle after that portion. And there is something with money coming out of the Silicon Valley that deals with this book as well, which I won't spoil. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting anti-California, California as a degraded land stuff in here, which, if we're going to unify this with another book that we've already gone through of Mason and Dixon, California is what ultimately lies at the end of the coast that Mason wanted to push through towards. And if he did, it was going to, fundamentally destroy the Edenic landscape. So there's a lot of interesting stuff, a lot of interesting congruity with his other books that comes up in this book. Once Maxine goes home, she checks in with her kids, and we learn that Nigel, or rather Ziggy, takes Krav Maga lessons. That's the Israeli martial arts that's used by their special forces and their military. Just kind of a random one for someone to be learning in 2001. I don't think it was quite that popular at the time, but it makes sense for potentially a Jewish family. But I do love the inclusion of the Agro Hour as a TV show they're watching, just as a throwback to Vineland with Agro World magazine.
Yeah.
And all the like weird like subculture around like martial arts and violence and all of that. It's now translated to a different medium, and is probably more violent for this younger generation than the magazine was for the older generation, where it seemed to be mostly interviews with martial artists. This is actually depicting, fighting and violence and all of that. Once Ziggy gets home, though, we learn about a crush that he has on his Krav Maga teacher. But this gets more into them playing a video game of them going around New York City killing pedestrians. Did we have any thoughts on this besides the fact that it's like Isaiah 24's wet dream in a video game?
It's so, as someone who grew up at this time, and had, what really kicked my memory was the mention of disabling the splatter options.
Yeah.
When Mortal Kombat came out, that was like the big thing, is that if you had it on Super Nintendo, you didn't have the blood, so it wasn't cool.
Yep.
And so that was always a big thing. Games like Doom and Grand Theft Auto had started coming out. It was prior to what it is now. Like, early Grand Theft Auto is wildly different than what everyone like now is used to. But
that's for sure.
That's what this game is obviously, I think, kind of referencing, although in a sort of almost inverted sense, in that you're actually kind of saving people in a weird way. It doesn't have the just run around and mindlessly kill everyone. Like, they make these mentions of like, oh yeah, well, you're, the kid's fine, like you're taking him to a safe place, and so you're just eliminating these like bad parents and bad people. Like, there's that justification to it. And I think it's fair at this point also to point out that, I mean, some of our listeners obviously weren't around at this time. There was a lot of discourse about video games and violence and how the two, if the two had anything to do with the other, which there have been numerous studies that have shown there is no correlation between violence in video games and violent behavior in the people who play them. But that did not stop the panic of parents and government and religious officials from trying to utilize that as a point of, as they do, a point of distraction from actual problems that are going on and actual ways to fix them. So when you had things like Columbine that happened and you had these other horrific events, it was always, the first thing you point to is the violent video games. And we can overlook the fact that, there's other root causes to these problems. It's clearly the video games. And so I think it's a really interesting examination of that, when you're taking out the blood of it, like at that point, is it still supposedly encouraging that violence? It's a sort of like video game ship of Theseus kind of thing. At what point does it stop becoming a violent video game and become something entirely different? So I think that was a really interesting section to read, and I think there's a lot of interesting discussion to be had about it.
Video game ship of Theseus was not a phrase I expected to hear today.
It's not a phrase I expected to say today.
Open Morrowind something. Yeah, I what I really like about this is that it's kind of the ideal scenario to I don't know what the right word is, but I guess to examine this framing that Pynchon has periodically returned to throughout his career about the ways that people tend to, and especially I think it's implied in capitalist systems, but not exclusively, people tend to iron away the parts of bad things that disgust them viscerally. You get rid of the blood, you get rid of the dead bodies, you get rid of the fact, oh, they're innocent people. No, nobody's innocent. These are bad people. Justify it all. Get rid of the blood, get rid of the body, get rid of the reminder of the pain that you might be causing theoretically. It's a video game, so. But you do all that, and Maxine suddenly is like, hey, maybe this isn't so bad, even though fundamentally it has, I think, what she would say are the same issues that she kind of has the rule against violent video games for.
Yeah, agreed. I think the other interesting thing is that if and this is another sort of my like noticings of like yuppies versus WASP stuff. The fact that it starts out with, I'm just going to read a section of here after they talk about the fact that there's no blood. But stealing fruit, this isn't a capital offense. What if a homeless person? There's no homeless people on the target list, Fiona assures her. No kids, babies, dogs, old people, never. We're out after yup, basically, so killing yuppies. What Giuliani would call quality of life issues, adds Ziggy. I had no idea old, grouchy people design video games. My dad's partner, Lucas, designed it, says Fiona. He calls it his Valentine to the Big Apple. We're beta testing it for him, Ziggy explains. The reason I think that that's interesting is and I wouldn't have clocked this if I hadn't also been reading Meet Me in the Bathroom by Lizzy Goodman, I think is her name right now. From a real-life cultural perspective of the background of 2001 in New York City, prior to the Twin Tower attack, this sort of, as the book calls it, rebirth of rock and roll was happening with bands like The Strokes and Interpol and the Jonathan Fire Eater, the Yeah Yeah Yeahs. Like, I could name off 70 of these bands. A lot of them came out in New York around this time, and there's a very interesting chunk of Meet Me in the Bathroom towards the end of it where Mark Maron, of all people, is talking a lot about the gentrification of New York and how that occurred and how the music scene played into it because of these weird esoteric laws that Giuliani leaned into as a way to try and prevent crime, where he literally made it illegal for people to be dancing. Like it was this weird, I can't remember the name of the statute or whatever, but it was illegal for people to dance. And for the longest time, it was just seen as like one of these weird laws where like you can't walk your alligator down the street on a Tuesday or whatever. But Giuliani, seeing it on the legal books, like leaned into it as a as a way for police to go into these bars and bust up shows that were going on, and to like close down old establishments that were representative of old New York, and sort of the mentality that had resisted gentrification for a really, really, really long time. And inadvertently, in him doing so, it allowed all of these yuppies to come into the city and build these new establishments, build these new bars, build these new high rises, because the owners of the previous establishment had no choice but to close it up. This is all history I had zero idea of until like last week. And so in that dialogue, I find it interesting, once again, showing this weird dichotomy of like a WASP versus yuppie mentality of, you know, this game is a gift from a yuppie software developer to New York, this city that historically has not been gentrified and resisted up until this time frame, for people to quote unquote like get revenge on the people that were ruining their city in their mind, in their mind state. And then of course that's later reinforced by the quote that we'll get to eventually about Times Square and everything else that was going on. But just again, really interesting social dynamics that he's getting into without fully expanding upon the history there.
Yeah, no, I think that's something that a lot of people like. I mean, it's definitely something I didn't know about until I think it was a few years ago. Really, was I mean, we all had this image of Giuliani, especially post 9/11, as, you know, the mayor
America's
of New York
mayor.
who brought the town together, and not to take away from what he did, because he did good things at that time, but people either don't know or have forgotten about the things that he did before that, and the way that he went about quote unquote cleaning up the city, and Disneyfying it, as we you know, I think it's at the end of chapter 5 that Times Square quote is, because yeah, he did a lot to really take away what little people in that city had. You know, the people who didn't have a lot of money, and who only had like their little store, or they had their, you know, their small apartment or whatever. That government found ways to take those away from those people, so that they could bring in the money and the power, and just make this sterile, gentrified New York is essentially what it became. And that has reverberated now through the rest of the country again. So it's this kind of, it's really interesting that we're doing this after Vineland, because we're seeing, that explosion of that in California, ripples out to the last part of, back to the East Coast of the States. And then from there, it explodes back out. And it's just this constant reverberation of, increasing the power of the wealthy in these areas, and, sort of forcing everyone who doesn't have enough, or who doesn't look the right way, or who isn't the kind of person that we want to be with, pushing all those people out, so we can make this nice little happy utopia, quote unquote, that they seem to want. And it's again, this is the whole, Pynchon's books are always taking place at this moment of zeitgeist of extreme change and power shifts and all of that. And this is, a prime example of that. And it's, being the most recent one, it's hard, because I really, I don't want this man to not write another book, because I want more of his perspective on all these things, especially things as they are now, or other parts of history where this has happened. But we have these little time capsules now, so that, the people who otherwise wouldn't have known about these things can get into these books and start to kind of piece these things together and understand how this cyclical nature of history is affecting the world around us, and has been for a very, very long time.
Yeah, 100% correct. And, just to bring up Isaiah 2:4 again, in this idea of killing the yuppies, and of Maxine saying her actual code is actually sort of fun, scanning the screen for her next target. She's already ready to kill another one.
Yeah.
Wait, I didn't say that. As an example of Isaiah 2:4's goal of non-real violence as a methodology for excising real-world frustration. Like that, this is exactly what he was talking about, except instead of it being this weird arcade fun center and complex, it's just in the home on the television.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to put it out there for all the listeners who might be uncomfortable with this content. Not all of us not all of us think that fixing broken windows is horrible.
There's a point at which gentrification should stop. Once the buildings are renovated, we can just stop. We don't need to build anything more. There doesn't need to be a juice bar in every corner.
Wait, you have a problem with kicking people out of their homes for the sake of slight benefits in terms of profits?
Yeah, to build Lincoln Center. Yeah, 100%. I think that's such a terrible thing to do.
The ultra wealthy need their second, third, fourth houses. They need summer homes.
These wokeists.
As someone who lives in a rapidly gentrifying city, there's something uniquely horrific about it.
It's disgusting.
Yeah.
It really, like, San Antonio's getting there. It's starting to happen here, and I hate seeing it.
It's the crazy thing to me though is it's happening everywhere.
Yeah,
which is
even small towns,
which is weird. Like that's if we want to talk about like cabals of WASP apparatus post 9/11, that's definitely one of them. Like BlackRock and all the land purchasing and all the weird gentrification where it's all the fucking same. It's all kombucha. It's all yoga. It's all cycling studios. It's all the same stuff. High-rise condos. It's crazy. New York was just a blueprint for what they're doing everywhere now.
Yeah, this is gonna sound like a joke, but a while ago, a few months back, I was walking down my my childhood street, or one of my childhood streets, and the thing that really stood out to me is that most of the front yards were not just barren patches of dirt with a chain link fence around it and maybe one tree. And it's fucking disgusting.
Yep.
That is not the case.
They haven't quite gotten to my neighborhood in Chicago yet. That's when I know it's really desperate, because I lived on the south side. So as soon as they get down there where gunshots are on the regular, that's when I know we're running out of time. But every time I go back to Chicago for something, I always drive through my old neighborhood and I'm like, nope, still shoes hanging over power lines. Yup.
Still good.
We're still okay.
Yeah.
Stamp of approval here.
Thankfully, we've kept the gunshots here.
Yeah.
And let's pray that continues.
Sorry, sentence.
We've kept the gunshots here. Let's pray that continues.
Look, you gotta hold on to your youth, however it's done.
Yeah. So after we get that aside with the video game, Virva McElmo comes to pick up her child, and this is where they get into a conversation about where the game came from and all of that. And it's also where we get the first mention of Deep Archer, which I don't think we should really spend too much time talking about it right now, because it has a significantly larger percentage of the later book. But just if you're reading along with us for the first time, you can keep that in mind.
Yeah, you just kind of write that down in the back of your brain, because it's going to be important.
I will also say on the word of like the conspiracy stuff I mentioned last week with the Monarch Project and all of that. And as we continue to go in with Deep Archer later, as we find out what we figure out, the idea that Deep Archer is a product being created by a CIA-controlled family and tech inventor for what the purpose of Deep Archer is and who's interested in buying its source code, it makes a lot of sense for Pynchon to insert that there from a conspiracy angle. I do also love at the bottom of page 36 where it mentions hash slingers again, and then immediately the narrator just goes whoop whoop whoop.
Yeah.
It made me laugh. It was like, it's very much the scene in Inherent Vice where Doc writes paranoia alert down on his on his notepad.
Just circles it and looks back up.
Yeah. Really good stuff.
Well, so I suppose I have a question for y'all. So the part where Deep Archer is introduced, our product is still totally Deep Archer, which is like departure, only you pronounce it deep archer.
Yeah.
Zen thing? Weed thing. So, how is it a weed thing? Am I missing something?
I don't. The only thing I can think is it's just one of those like making a connection where there's maybe a very tenuous connection when you're stoned, and it makes sense at the time, but it doesn't make sense to anyone else, and it won't make sense once you are no longer high.
I thought it was a joke about like how these tech people to come up with some of the stupid names, like Cody is saying, for their companies, you would only have come up with them while you're stoned. Like, I just took a hit of a bomb, be like, hey, what if we named our company Departure, but like we spelled it Departure? Like, just some stupid high thinking like that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I do love, though, that Pinchon indicates when somebody is from California by adding question marks at the end of all of
question mark in the English language.
Weed thing. Just lately, everybody's been all over the source code. The feds, game companies, fucking Microsoft all have offers on the table. It's the security design. Like, nothing any of these people's ever seen. And it's making them all crazy.
Yeah, that's that California upward inflection at the end of everything.
Yes. Yeah, it's great. I love that he includes that in there. And yeah, the crucial piece of information that we learn is that all of these people aren't looking to purchase Departure. They're looking to purchase the source code. And if you're someone who doesn't know anything about, computers and you're listening to the show, the difference there would be like if you wanted to purchase Microsoft, or let's say Google, right? If you want to purchase Google, you would own Google in the way that Google runs. If you wanted to purchase Google's source code, you'd be purchasing that because you want to use its algorithm for something else.
It's the difference between buying KFC and buying the recipe. Yeah,
exactly. That's a better way to put it. So all of these organizations, including the government, are trying to purchase that code for some reason. The biggest one of their funders, though, would be Gabriel Ice, and there's a lot more to come with that guy. That again is better time spent later in the book.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not without his connections, and he's not without his deep state placement. The same as Virva's husband. It really reads more like the government has put both of these people in place to do this thing that's going to happen, but they need to make everything look kind of legit for the average person, so that's how they're going to go about doing it. And then moving from there, we get a mention of Palo Alto, which I notated just because that's, if you don't know, that's basically Silicon Valley Central. Palo Alto's where like Microsoft is, it's where HP is at, it's where Tesla's at, it's where Google is at. Well, Google's in Mountain View now, but they were in Palo Alto.
Mm-hmm.
So again, looking at this aspect of California as this place where sort of money and power is coming from, is a good thing to keep in mind. We also learned that Virva might be having an affair with her husband's partner, but she doesn't admit to it. Any of y'all had Beanie Babies when you were growing up?
Okay, let me go on a tangent for a minute, because
yeah,
not only did my mom really get into the Beanie Babies thing, she still has a lot of them, which I think is really interesting because it really highlights what the absurdity of this. As it's mentioned in the book, this whole kind of this all comes back for anyone unaware. Beanie Babies were just this a fad from the late 90s, and it's a prime example of, similar to the .com thing, of this just hollow product that served no purpose. You don't do anything with them. They're not like a usable thing. They're the Funko Pops of the late 90s.
Perfect analogy.
And
but I'm still fucking waiting for those bastards to drop off the market.
They're really holding on.
Somehow it has not happened.
Yeah.
But it's gotta eventually.
That bubble's gonna burst real soon. But yeah, that's what it was. It was Funko Pops for the end of the 20th century, and it you had people with like fist fighting over these things, especially like the quote unquote rare ones, like the Princess Diana one. And they would hoard them and they would do nothing with them. My mom literally, and I love my mom. I don't think she's listening to this, but if you are, Mom, we'll find a place for them. But they're in they're just in these giant plastic tubs in her house. And they've been there for 30 years now. And there's no market for them anymore. So like you've invested all of this money into these things. And I don't remember who it is mentions in the book. I think it might have been Otis. It's like there's no packaging on these things. So like there's no inherent value in saving them because they're essentially degrading every minute that they're out in the wild. Yeah. And so it's not like it's a collectible card or something that's in a special casing, or it's a video game in its original box. It's already this just rumpled ass toy that does nothing and now is a completely worthless commodity. But people dumped, I mean, literal thousands of dollars into these things. And people, like, when people got divorced because their marriage ultimately fell apart because of this shit, they would fight over who got to keep them in court.
The Beanie Babies.
And it's absurd. But it's a prime example of this hyper capitalistic thing of everyone had this fear of not having them, and what would that do? And like, if I don't have them, then I'm not gonna. I can make all this money, and it just highlights that absolute mindlessness that comes over people when these kind of things get released. And the Funko Pops is just an extension of that.
Yep, completely.
So I was really not expecting to be in this position, but as someone, as stated, I'm 10 years old.
I thought you were going to say as a Beanie Baby enthusiast.
No, but what I am going to say is I am like, to a very mild extent, but viscerally offended at the comparison between Beanie Babies and Funko Pops.
No, you're not.
I stand by it.
No. You know why I am? Because as a child, I played with Beanie Babies because they were like $5 stuffed animals. And there's nothing, like, sure, you can't do anything with it, but you can't do anything with a stuffed bear either.
That's true. That's true.
There's literally nothing you can do with a Funko Pop. It literally just sits there.
It can stare at you with
action figure, like,
dead eyes. Oh my god.
Yeah.
That's a good point, Will. You went in a different direction with that.
For all of the insanity, for all of the stupidity and insanity around the Beanie Baby craze and treating it like a collectible, at the very least, children could play with them and like actually develop like a sense of connection to it, because it wasn't literally just a piece of vinyl printed identically to every other thing.
Yeah.
There is at least,
their parents wouldn't let them. Tickle Me Elmo was another example of that. Like it legitimately was a toy, but it became a commodity and people got stupid about it.
Yep. That's a perfect description.
Yep.
Yeah. Will, do you want to read the quote from the end of chapter 4, starting with Ziggy's Not So Sure? On the last page.
Sure, fine. Fine.
Hey, you have the book
it's
now.
Totally
you can find
not
the
like
page
my favorite
Yeah.
quote from the chapter. Yeah, it's page 40, just so everyone's aware, because I can share that information now. Ziggy's not so sure. Except for 1 or 2 special editions, he points out, there's no packaging on Beanie Babies, which is important to collectors, and also means that 99+% are out there loose in the environment, getting trampled, chewed apart, and drooled on, lost under the radiator, eaten by mice. In 10 years, there won't be one in collectible condition, unless Mrs. McElmo is stashing them in archival plastic someplace besides Fiona's room. Like dark and temperature controlled would be nice, but that'll never occur to her because it makes too much sense. You're saying, she's crazy, Mom.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly what she all just said.
Yeah, it's a perfect description of all of the issues with those fads.
Yeah, completely. And if you want to go the conspiracy route, that phrase of she's crazy could also be applied to the idea that her mind may have been broken by the CIA. and that this is the only thing that can explain the Beanie Baby craze. It's a bunch of people MK Ultra'd out.
You think
coming around buying loose stuffed animals?
Are we drawing a direct line between the Montauk Project and Beanie Baby collectors? Is that where we're going with this?
It didn't occur to me at the time, but it's sitting here now.
That has to be. Okay, we need to start a whole new podcast aside from this one where we really dive into this idea.
If that's the case, and this is a criticism, I think, of what would be Pynchon's theory. Tell that to all of the baby boomers who ordered thousands of collectibles from magazines over the 60s and 70s.
Fair. X-ray specs.
You mean the same ones who are still ordering the collectible commemorative gold everything that is out now?
Exactly. Yeah, like the
commemorative
little
Trump
statues.
coins.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, it's a pewter mug, because those are hard to make. And it'll be worth a lot of money in 200 years.
It's only going to appreciate in value. You just have to be patient.
Decorative display plates of Pope Benedict XVI.
Is this just a spoon with a silk screen print on it? No, it's precious cargo.
You gotta get that insured.
Give this a couple of centuries. You're gonna have a real high ROI on that thing.
All that being said, the Princess Diana Beanie Baby, if you have one with a tag error, does still go for $50,000.
Jesus. But I think those were the only ones that were actually put into cases and stuff.
That would be correct. Yeah. The point from, I don't remember which kid it was. It's still Ziggy. Except one or two special editions.
Yeah.
That ended up being 100% correct.
Yep.
There's 3 of them that are worth that amount of money. So chapter 5 opens up with Maxine officially doing her snooping into Ash Slingers. And she's running some different fraud investigation techniques and algorithms through it. I'm going to read a quote here that says, "They assume that the first digits 1 through 9 are all going to be evenly distributed so that each one will turn up 11% of the time, 11 and change. But in fact, for most lists of numbers, the distribution of first digits is not linear but logarithmic. About 30% of the time, the first digit actually turns out to be a 1. Then 17.5% of the time, it'll be a 2, so forth, dropping off to in a curve to only 4.6% of the time you get to a 9. It's been a while since I read this book, so I can't remember if it becomes more explicit later on. But talking about the percentages of occurrence of numbers brings up a real thing called the Global Consciousness Project. For those who don't know, the Global Consciousness Project was a division of research at Princeton, which again, if we're talking about WASP establishments, Princeton's up there, where they would have these different computer nodes scattered across the globe. I forget where all of them were at. And half of them were just random number generators. They would just spit out random number after random number after random number. And then the other half of them were basically validator nodes that were guessing what the different numbers were going to be. And the concept behind this project, which kind of gets into some of the stuff with Departure that shows up later in the book, was this question of whether or not there was an idea of a genuine global human consciousness. And could people sort of line up with one another to predict events that were going to occur, or to be thinking about the same thing all at the same time, or something like that. This has been reported by a lot of different mainstream media outlets. It's not just crazy conspiracy people doing this, but as time has gone on, some people have called into question this account. Some people have called into question whether or not there is any real validity to this thing happening, but apparently, about 3 hours before the attacks on 9/11, the machine that the Global Consciousness Project used began to spit out significantly more hits than normal. So significantly more often, one validator node would correctly guess the number over and over and over and over and over again. And if you run through the percentages, like the idea this would happen on 9/11 with the significant majority of the percentages going to ones and a lower percentage going to the number 9, if you're going to go down that conspiracy rabbit hole, is actually pretty accurate to how the math works out. But the idea that this random number generator predicted 3 hours before that this was going to happen, in the minds of some conspiracy theorists, points to the idea that perhaps 9/11 was sort of a mass ritual. And there's actually a book about this called 9/11 as Mass Ritual by S.K. Bain that gets into the idea that there was this global conspiracy by by dark money and by the WASP apparatus and by these politicians to bring about this kind of end of history event, and that this random sequence of numbers, going out of this logarithmic chain points to that. So something, again, another piece just to keep in mind, another thing that Pynchon is likely pulling from with the book that he's writing here from real world history.
Can I just say that model, that study model, sounds like a Jungian's idea of astrology. Like,
yeah.
Dear Lord, do you have any conception of how the universe works? Like, not even, like, I'm not even sitting here saying astrology is bullshit. Mm-hmm. I don't believe in it, but I think there's a lot more logic that goes into astrology than that kind of thing.
Yes, no, you'd be absolutely correct.
Yeah, I'm looking at it on Wikipedia, and there have been follow-ups in 2003 and 2007 where they basically said, like, no, there's no, they can't quantify that anything was actually reliable in that. There is a good quote on here about it. Robert Matthews, who was a British physicist and science writer, said, "The only conclusion to emerge from the Global Consciousness Project so far is that data without a theory is as meaningless as words without a narrative." That's a pretty good summation of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just super, and just like why was Princeton funding that? Like what?
This is again like there's money. Just like we have money, just give it
just
to
money.
people.
Yeah, like there have been so many instances, like looking outside of like the astrology or other like woo woo stuff. Like there have been so many instances of universities or the the intelligentsia of this country just throwing money at researchers that have no proof for what they're doing or are just grifters. Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes being a great example of that. I can't remember the psychological researcher now, but there's a fairly famous psychological researcher from like the 2010s who did a bunch of TED Talks, and it was later revealed that all his research was bogus. Philip Zimbardo in the Stanford prison experiment, that was actually all bogus too.
Jesus, yeah.
Like it happens all the time. We're just like, yeah, we got all this money, just let's throw it at some crackpot, and the Global Consciousness Project was part of that.
John C. Lilly.
Yeah, there you go.
The dolphins on acid studies.
I love that story so much. It's so insane.
Yeah, the actual like details of the story are quite almost sweet in some ways, but the ideas behind it are so detestably dumb.
Yeah, it's and that poor woman who I can only describe as being gaslit in a way by these scientists into letting this dolphin into her home and everything that followed. It's just, the years of therapy to undo that. Can't even imagine.
Yeah.
So what Maxine figures out is that basically Hash Slingers is throwing a bunch of money out to all these different companies or contractors to use them as shell corporations. And it's messing with their legitimate data. And maybe my favorite joke of the whole book, we get the quote, the most recent of these problematical payees is a little operation downtown calling itself Hogagloch.com, an acronym for, hey, we got awesome and hip web graphics here. Do they? Somehow doubtful.
Graphics with an X, too.
Yeah.
It's pretty important.
Oh, that name kills me every time.
Yeah. Hogagloch. It's just so amazing.
It sounds like Jerry Lewis having a stroke.
It does. Yeah. And if we're talking about like the hard-boiled nature of these chapters, that closing line in the paragraph of she hates it when paranoia like Regs gets real world, probably worth the look though, is just, it's so good. It's so good,
yeah.
Yeah. At the end of page 42, we've got another Wasps versus Yuppies thing here, but it's too nice, a sitting duck asking to get torn down someday soon, and the period detailing recycled into the decor of some Yups overpriced loft. So we get more detail of that as she goes to the offices of Huagach. And when she gets there, it's completely emptied out, but she does meet somebody there who's alone in the office stealing internet.
Is it really stealing if it's 56K?
Not
doing anybody any services.
And playing Tetris. It's enough to run Tetris.
Having lived in that time when 56K was like, I didn't have 56K for a long time. I was at 28. And so all my friends were downloading albums in 3 or 4 days, and I was taking a week or two.
It was so fun.
It was really, and there are people who still have dial-up, like, which is weird. Like, my parents didn't have high speed until maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Just because they live in a small town.
Rural areas, yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, she figures out that this is a woman who occasionally contracted at Hagawach, and do we have any specific thoughts on her character?
On Driscoll?
Yes.
I don't have any other than her love of Zima. I don't really have anything.
Hey. I will defend Zima until the day that I die, because that is actually a good alcohol, and they briefly brought it back in the late 2010s.
Mm-hmm. And it was the Crystal Pepsi of alcohol.
And Crystal Pepsi's also good.
Yes, I will defend Crystal Pepsi. I absolutely will defend that one. I can't with the Zima. It's way too sweet.
It's sparkling orange flavored vodka, basically. It's delicious. Lemon lime sparkling vodka. It's very good. Very good. I wish I had a Zima tap. Maybe not in my house, but at a bar conveniently located nearby.
And when you walked in, the bartender immediately knew to start pouring one for you.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, man.
I will never forgive the Zima company for not keeping their revival in America and moving it only to Japan, because that's the only place that you can get it now.
That's a shame. And again, I'm with you on the Crystal Pepsi thing. I genuinely enjoyed Crystal Pepsi. That's a shame.
Crystal Pepsi's great.
It is.
Yeah, it is.
Anyways, I don't really have anything to say about her. I do really enjoy the conversation that her and Maxine had, though. That was one of my favorite scenes in this chapter. Mm-hmm. That was a really fun interaction between them.
Yeah, I agree. The only notes that I really have on Driscoll, outside of the fact that we learned that Hashslingers basically purchased Hagawach when they were going out of business to turn it into a shell company, is that her name is interesting because Driscoll Paget is such a wasp-ass name.
Yeah.
In fact, that is literally what I have written in the margins of my copy, wasp-ass name in all caps. But she isn't a wasp. She's a yuppie, but she still talks about the yuppies going down the toilet when they're talking about like the liquidation event. So it's possible that the reason why like her and Maxine are simpatico is because they're of potentially a similar mindset or a similar age, where the two of them are kind of, caught flighting in between them. Driscoll maybe should have been a wasp based upon her name. Certainly seems like that was the direction she should have gone in her life. And instead, she went towards the coding side, but that didn't work out. She didn't become a yuppie, and so now she's kind of in this weird sort of hacker limbo where she's stealing internet and Photoshop files from shut down, at least to the public companies, in an effort to build out her contract work. So again, she's just another one of these characters that kind of rides the line between the two of those. And I noticed that in a lot of cases, she also talks with question marks at the end of her sentences. It does not specifically call out the fact that she's from California, but if we're noticing that as characteristic of one character who we know for sure is from California, it would stand to reason that potentially she is too. So another one of these things cropping up that's just interesting to note.
Yeah, I really like Driscoll, and it's not for any real reason. I think the idea of like a hacker, very nerdy hacker, who's obsessed with like many people were at the time, looking exactly like Jennifer Aniston.
Yes,
is deeply funny, but also she's one of the few people in this book where it feels like, and she's not 100% upfront with Driscoll, it feels like Maxine though is actually like connecting with somebody.
Yeah, definitely.
I think it's a really enjoyable scene for that reason as well.
It's the Zimas.
It might be the Zima.
Sorry, go ahead, Will.
People are always posting and writing these articles these days about loneliness. You might have found the solution.
If we bring back Zima,
we could do what Coke failed to do and unite the world.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%.
I think what I really like about her, to kind of build off of what Will was saying, is this goes back to the detective story, where you have this person that the detective meets and is able to supply them with really relevant information, and in a manner that makes them reliable. Like, this isn't just some crazy person who's spouting off this random string of information. Like, Driscoll seems to know what she's talking about, as evidenced with her talk about the dot-comer delusion. And then she has a line a little bit later where she's talking about how a lot of these guys who got all this money weren't really smart at all, and it wasn't that they like intelligently got their way into it. They were just lucky. They're stupid, but they just got really lucky. And I think that's really kind of important to note about a lot of the people at that time who were making money, was that they literally did not have a business plan necessarily. They had a lot of money. They made some choices and they got lucky, and they never really had consequences as a result, because they would make enough money to keep going and didn't have any, they never failed. And so they were able to just keep kind of pushing on and doing the same thing over and over and over.
Yeah. Which, I mean, especially coming from her character, especially if she has a WASP background, as her name would suggest, it would make sense that she would be able to see that and articulate that. Mm-hmm. I know people with money. I know how smart people operate, and that is not it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that the other aspect I love about their conversation is just, again, you get to see the way Maxine's mind works, where she's like, okay, let's try this. And then she says hash slingers. Like, the way the narration kind of really seats you sort of behind her eyes, following along her thought process as she both simultaneously builds this relationship, but also builds her case at the same time, is really, really effective writing from Pynchon in a noir kind of hard-boiled manner, which I love. And there's also a quote that starts on 46, it goes to 47, where it says, he's considered cool? No, he's a dickhead, speaking of Gabriel Ice, but one of these early ones, a pioneer dickhead. Ever get to go one of those legendary hash slingers parties? Nope. You? Once or twice. That time they had all the naked chicks out in the freight elevator covered with Krispy Kreme donuts? And the one where Britney Spears showed up as disguised as Jay-Z? Only it turned out to be a Britney Spears lookalike? Again, another reference to how Gabriel Ice is Josh Harris. In real life, Josh Harris had this company called Pseudo, and Pseudo was basically YouTube before YouTube. If YouTube was managed top down like a television station where the different like channels on it were different distinct content. And a big part of Josh Harris's promotion of Pseudo and to trying to get people to invest in it or to come work there wasn't just the fact that he was like, you can have your own show on Pseudo and you can do whatever you want. It was also these really lavish, like wild parties that he would throw at the same time that all of that was going on. So again, more pieces to point towards this connection between the two people, the fictional and the real character.
And I think we should point out, at the risk of making that kind of a glamorized thing, like if again, go watch We Live in Public, because that shit got dark real fast.
Oh yeah,
like
yeah.
Everyone was having a real good time until the breaking point hit, and holy shit, just go watch that movie, because Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. Going further into their conversation on page 48, we have this quote here that says, word around the cubes is that there's these huge U.S. government contracts. Everybody's after them. Big deal coming up in the Middle East. Some people in the community saying Gulf War II. Figures Bush would want to do his daddy one better. Again, looking at Pynchon building this case of the WASP establishment, WASP apparatus taking, the Twin Towers as this end of history event, not just as a pretext to invade and for George Bush to do his dad one better, but also everything that came after 9/11 and the modern establishment that we live in now that it created. Just sort of putting it out there that all of these people in New York, and again, New York is a character holding all these secrets, they all know something's going on. They know Gulf War II is going to happen, even though that took place after the invasion of Afghanistan. But nobody's saying anything. Nobody's talking. It's all staying in closed doors. It's all staying quiet. New York is that enigmatic suspect that holds the secrets. So again, that reinforcement of this domain that you're kind of going through. And then again, she says later on, nerds lost out once again and the jocks won. More wasps versus yuppie thing. And then, the big part where I clocked her potentially being from California was I was doing it like everybody else, seriously black with these short bangs. But all the time I secretly wanted to look like Rachel on Friends. So I started collecting these Jennifer Aniston images off the websites and tabloids and shit. This was also a real thing, as Will pointed out. I don't know why the Jennifer Aniston obsession happened. Obviously, it's because of Friends, but of all the women that were on that show, I don't know why she was the one that everyone needed to have the hair like. I remember people needing to have her hair.
Keep in mind that this was also around the time when reality TV was starting to morph into what it is now. Away from what it was, because if you trace it back early enough to like the Road Rules and Real World stuff, like it was kind of the beginnings of that were there, but it hadn't really mutated into the behemoth and the grotesque thing that it is now. But this era is when that whole craze with people who would pay tens of thousands of dollars to have plastic surgery to look like celebrities really started becoming a thing. And there were certain celebrities that it seemed were hyper fixated on, and Jennifer Aniston was one of them. Brad Pitt was another one. Like Angelina Jolie. Like this was that time where, and people were glorifying this. Like these are the people that were getting TV shows, was these I want to look like a celebrity people, and they would allow themselves to be put through this whole process, for that. And it's a funny thing to have this whole page of this, talking about the Rachel haircut, but it was a real, like a wild obsession at that time. And everybody had that haircut.
It was probably Brad Pitt, the fact that they were dating more than anything else. But very odd.
Wait, you don't think it was just a sincere appreciation of Jennifer Aniston's magnetic personality and appearance?
I think that might have been part of it. I was never a Jennifer Aniston lover. I if we're talking about the women on Friends, I would much have preferred like Courtney Cox or
Lisa Kudrow.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, my not so hot take is that it's taken until the 2020s for Jennifer Aniston's acting to really get to a decent level.
Oh, definitely.
You could probably make that towards anyone on Friends. I think a lot of them struggled. Other than David Schwimmer, a lot of them struggled to get out of being typecast as those characters. I never got Friends. I never got into that show. I knew people who were really obsessed with it. It was never my thing. But
I watched it with my sisters, but I never got it either. I preferred Seinfeld.
Yeah, I did too. But I think that's the thing, is a lot of them just could not get out of that net.
Yeah, very, very true. Yeah, David Schwimmer did the smart thing, and then immediately after Friends, he was like, I'm going to go play an asshole on Band of Brothers, and that's going to fundamentally alter the way people see me. And it worked.
You think that maybe Matt LeBlanc playing literally the same character immediately afterwards, and then his next biggest role being playing literally himself, might have been a bad career move?
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, basically none of them are working anymore, other than very occasionally, because they made so much money off of Friends. Other than Jennifer Aniston. Yeah, towards the end of that show, they have a freaking $1 million an episode for each of them.
Yeah.
Which is just wild to me. Yeah. Cody, do you want to read the quote on page 49 about the demented hairdressers that she goes to see?
Yeah. This is going into page 50 as well. Jesus, this scene. All right. So starting on page 49. Okay, Driscoll, this is against my better judgment, but you might want to go try Murray and Morris over in the Flower District, rooting through her purse to find one of their cards, or, well, more like a 10% off introductory coupon. These two demented yet somehow board-certified trichologists have recently spotted an opportunity in the Jennifer Aniston wannabe boom and are investing heavily in Sahag curlers and forever going off to Caribbean resorts for intensive tutorial workshops and color weaving. Their remorseless urges toward innovation extend to other salon services as well. Our meat facial today, Miss Loeffler? How's that? You didn't get our offer in the mail? On special this week, works miracles for the complexion. Freshly killed, of course, before those enzymes have had a chance to break it down. How about it? Well, I don't, wonderful Morris, kill the chicken? From the back room comes horrible panicked squawking, then silence. Maxine, meantime, is tilted back, eyelids aflutter when, now we'll just apply some of this, wham, meat here, directly onto this lovely yet depleted face. Pardon? Easy, Morris. Why is it moving around like that? Wait, are you guys putting a real dead chicken on my... Not quite dead yet, Morris jovially informs the thrashing Maxine as blood and feathers fly everywhere. Each time she comes in here, it is something like this. Each time she exits the salon swearing it's for the last time. Still, she can't help noticing the crowds of Jennifer Aniston more or less lookalikes competing for dryer time lately, as if downtown is Las Vegas and Jennifer Aniston the next Elvis. I had to stop reading for a little bit when I read that, because I had forgotten entirely about that scene.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, but also is very obviously a send up of like, and it calmed down, I feel like, in the mid 2010s, but is now ramping up again, of just like the absurd lengths that some people go to for like skincare regimens and all that. Yep. It's getting real crazy out there now, guys. Yeah. It's every time I go to Sephora to get the like 5 products I use, I'm like, who has time to do like a 20-step skincare process and all? It's exhausting to even think about.
Yeah, and I love the touch of, and this is, I don't know if this was an intentional commentary from Pynchon or if it's just a funny line that he thought would work, but it works as commentary. The enzymes haven't had a chance to break down yet when it's freshly killed.
Yeah.
Just so anyone who's not educated in biology knows, the enzymes in like meat wouldn't do anything to pretty much anything on a face or anything. Like, there are enzymes, they handle tiny little molecules that mostly like shift electricity around. Like, it is just nonsense, and it's great nonsense.
Yeah, it's so good. And just also the inclusion of like, he killed it in the back, but it's still shaking around, which is exactly what chickens do when they're killed. Like, it's so funny, just every detail of it. I do also love the line a little bit after that where it says, each time she comes in here, it is something like this. Each time she exits the salon swearing it's for the last time.
Yeah.
I love that, because That's so real. I have seen the same hairdresser, not currently. My current hairdresser's great. I love Nicole so much. If you're somehow listening to this, I will never change hairdressers. I drive 2 hours to see you, Nicole. You're fine. But I have at previous times in my life had hairdressers that every time I leave, I'm like, well, that was bad. But I just keep going back because it's easier to do that than the hellacious process of trying to find another hairdresser and getting in there. Just a moment of real realism that I would imagine potentially Pinchon got from maybe his wife or partner at some point.
You probably could apply that to a lot of things. Like I know people who still go to restaurants that they openly hate, but it's like it's close, it's there, so they still go.
I don't get that.
Oh, talk about Taco Bell, for example.
Yeah.
Hey,
Nobody likes Taco Bell.
Hey.
Except I do.
Hey.
In a way that I am deeply ashamed of.
Yeah, no, I'd say I like Taco Bell and I am ashamed.
Because it is objectively not good.
I don't know if I'd go that far.
Well, I mean, it is edible food that will not poison you. So, you know.
I don't know if I'd go that far.
Calling it food is generous, I think. I will push it. I don't like taco. I haven't had Taco Bell in almost probably 25 years. But I mean, we all have our thing that we're like, we get it and we're like, I really should not do this, but I'm doing it.
Taco Bell is a lot like Mountain Dew Code Red and sleeping with a mattress on the floor. All three of them make you feel like a heroin addict, but you just can't quite get away from it.
Is that what Code Red feels like to you?
Yeah.
Another thing I have not had in a long, long time.
Listen, that little section about the not wanting to go back but inevitably doing so reminds me of the question that I did forget to bring up for the previous chapter. Why in the world does she keep going back to Sean?
It probably it's like the less of all the other evils of therapists that she's gone to is my thought. Like or she's just given enough to him that she's like, I don't want to start over and have to, like, I have switched therapists and it's like, I hate having to like, okay, let's pack everything back up and then we'll unpack it all again. And this is going to take, so much more time.
I see it as kind of like, as a fraud investigator, she prefers someone who is grifting because at least she can see through that to what might be more truthful.
That's a good point too. Yeah.
Is the reason why I think she probably does, as opposed to like, let's say Maxine is someone who might be like skeptical of therapy as a concept. Like I could see how to her going to somebody that she knows is a scam artist so that she can see through the lies to what might be truthful is more comforting than going to somebody that has all these like certificates and plaques on the wall and wears like earth tone sweaters and talks in a very like calm voice and has wood paneled walls, being a harder thing for her to be able to sort of transparently parse out in her own mind.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
All right. When they eventually leave, they realize that somebody has been watching them for quite a while. And sure enough, they are. And Maxine has to go through quite a crazy route to ditch them. And it's a great moment of again paranoia, but a great moment of classic like hard-boiled detective stuff, taking all these different routes to shed your tail.
Shaking the tail. And
given that it happened immediately after she showed up at her first real-life investigation spot, clearly indicates to her that there's something really foul at play here.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so chapter 6 opens up with them eating pizza for supper, which is always a classic. Big fan.
Oh yeah.
Can't imagine how many times I got excited about that when my parents did that.
Oh yeah.
But which kid? Ziggy says that they had a visitor at school named March Kelleher. She'll come up later. She has like a whole speech that is included in the book at a later point. But this was another case where I was like, is there something about this name? So I went to Googling. There's no March Kelleher, but there is a Kelleher. In real life, there was a guy named Herb Kelleher and he was actually the longtime CEO of Southwest Airlines. He went to both Wesleyan and NYU, so pretty waspy. After that, he was a clerk for the New Jersey Supreme Court, even more waspy. Then he got to be a partner at a law firm, and one of their clients was one of the people starting Southwest Airlines. So he got in on the ground floor of Southwest Airlines, and was both like president, CEO, and chairman of the board at once the company got off the ground, and was that in that position for a very, very, very long time. In fact, he was in that position for so long that he stepped down as CEO in March of 2001. He remained on the board, though, for another 7 years until 2008, when he retired. But only 2 years after he retired, he was named as the chairman of the board for the Federal Reserve Bank in Dallas in 2010. Southwest notably was the very first airline to start flying after 9/11, 3 days afterwards. The reason I mention all of that history is not just the waspy connections of all of that, but March's speech that she will give at a later point in the book. If you're going to look at this guy's career from a conspiracy angle of the price of my silence, to take her exact phrase, the price of his silence was him stepping down from his company, but eventually being given the Federal Reserve Bank chairmancy in Dallas, which has its own obvious conspiracy connections. So just another interesting choice on behalf of Pynchon for one of his characters' names, especially given that March Kelleher is also the mother-in-law to Gabriel Ice, and happens to be good friends with Maxine because of their old strike days. Do we have any thoughts on March Kelleher that we want to throw out there?
I don't have anything in particular at this point, but I find her really... I find it interesting to view her as not quite as much as like Doc Sportello, but a sort of self-insert for Pynchon, given the diatribes she goes on.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say exactly the same thing. Yeah, a lot of her dialogue reads like a very self-inserted kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. She stands out there as one of them, especially just the whole history of like the strike breakers versus the union, representatives that Pynchon loves to include in a lot of his books. The fact that she's super involved in that, the fact that he uses it as a sequence to talk about Lincoln Center and the sweeping out of the Hispanic families from that area and how that ties into West Side Story.
Yeah.
All of which is also real history, all very real stuff that he's including there.
Yeah.
So interesting stuff from her, but yeah, she becomes more important, I would say, later with that parable that she gives to the kids.
She does have one of my favorite lines in this chapter where at the end of 56 and the beginning of 57, she says, the fucking fascists who call the shots haven't stopped needing races to hate each other. It's how they keep wages down and rents high and all the power over on the east side and everything ugly and brain dead just the way they like it. That's where I'm like, that's Pynchon just venting.
Yep.
100%. And I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I really love her. If we're doing favorite March quotes from this section, I love her. They even had the chutzpah to actually film West Side fucking Story in the same neighborhood they were destroying. Culture. I'm sorry, Herman Goering was right. Every time you hear the word, check your sidearm. Culture attracts the worst impulses of the moneyed. It has no honor. It begs to be suburbanized and corrupted. Which, yeah, talking about like gentrification and yuppie shit as we have over the course of this episode, that's a really, really relevant line.
Mm-hmm.
Not just that, but we have a connection that she brings up with Nicaragua and Ronald Reagan, which becomes more relevant later with the introduction of I guess you could call him the antagonist of this book. But yeah, he hasn't come into the narrative yet. But everything going on in Nicaragua and the banana republics and the United Fruit Company, all of that is relevant to his character, certainly.
So I have a bit of a background question. I get the gist from what's in the book, but do either of you have any ideas about the context of the protesters against co-op conversion for these apartment buildings? Because on a surface level, it does look contradictory to, for all of these socialists to be saying, hey, no, we want to continue living with a single person owning our home instead of living in a legal compact that is equally shared amongst everyone who lives in a building.
That's a great question. I think that some of it is meant to be kind of referential to like the WTC protests, where a lot of that got astroturfed by people being paid by the police or the government to go in and turn them violent to get them broken up, or to be like specifically, sort of attract contradictory attention to it or negative attention from the main perspective. Because you're right, like it is a contradiction for them to not want these co-ops to be there and to instead go after a single owner. I can't think of anything from history that I couldn't find anything specifically about like early co-op conversion protests in the early 2000s or anything like that. So that was what I read it as. I just read it as a potential, sort of comparison to how these things get co-opted or busted up in ways that don't make sense.
Yeah, that was kind of my read on it too. Kind of similar to Vineland, of just having police inserts or government inserts into those protests to try and disrupt things from the inside out.
Yeah, I guess the only reason I don't, that's not how I read it.
Mm-hmm.
It comes down to, it seems like there might be like specific context about like there being some kind of like buyout program, like the city having passed legislation within that time frame that made it so that a co-op conversion would be very profitable for the building owner or something. I don't know.
I guess if you want to look at it potentially from a yuppie angle, you could look at it as HOAs, like homeowners associations existing in like gated communities, and that ruining kind of the experience of living there, and a fear from a gentrifying force perspective of like, well, if we get this board in here, this co-op board, what am I not going to be able to like paint the walls in my apartment, or am I not going to be able to do this or that or something like that?
Yeah, I guess so. It just feels a bit trivializing the way he frames it, for if that were like the way he was looking at the actual historical thing.
Yeah,
because I don't know.
Yeah, I tried finding anything specific about it, but I couldn't. This is another one of those cases where, if there's any listeners who know anything about it, please let us know. Next up, we have Reg reaching back out to Maxine, saying that he contracted someone to go into the deep web to try and crack Hashlinger's code. And it turns out that it's possible that Hashlinger's security kind of defenses are run by Gabriel Ice himself. And that he throws out these insults to people who try to get into their system. I did love that. Congratulations, noob. You think you made it in, but all you're really in now is a world of deep shit, is the message that his hacker receives. And then later on, when he tries to get through again, it says, noob, do you really know who you're fucking with? I loved that portion of it. But of course, this is all pointing towards the idea that there's something weird going on with the company. And the reason why Gabriel Ice runs the department himself is because apparently there was a breach at one point that cost them a big contract with the Navy. Another government connection between Gabriel Ice and Hashlingers and the government. Any thoughts on this portion before we move on?
No, just another one of those nice, kind of hard-boiled back and forths. Where there's a a surface level threat presented in the quest for information that really doesn't seem to have much substance other than just like, it sounds like someone trying to be tough and scare you off of whatever it is you're trying to get to, but ultimately pointing more towards the person you're really going for anyway. It's doing a really good job of setting up Gabriel Ice and kind of informing the reader of who this guy is and what he's doing without really giving you the full picture just yet.
Yeah, it is there. This is a real technological security technique. It is a honeypot, but it's another one of those contradictions in terms where if you are running a honeypot as part of your security system, because you wouldn't just have a honeypot. You're not going to tell people that they're in a closed area. You're not going to tell them that they're not actually in the what's the old 80s hacker term? It's not coming to me.
I'm in.
Well, yeah, but what are they in? The mainframe.
The mainframe,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, you're not going to tell people they're not in the mainframe. You're going to let them believe that they've outsmarted you so that you can build new defenses. So is this Gabriel Ice doing some kind of weird, is it just a joke for himself? Is it like him being richer than he is clever and thinking that this will turn people away?
Well, in the conversation with I was going to say Horst, but that's not who she was talking to. With Driscoll, they talk about the fact that what will happen is people will try to break into the system, and then Gabriel Ice will basically be like, "Hey, you want to work for us instead of going to jail?" And Maxine in this conversation brings that up again as like a potential explanation for it.
It's I understand all of that, and I get where it's coming from. For me, it comes off as comical in its approach, because it sounds like it's that 80s way of recruiting bad guys of finding these the youths on the street who are up to no good and seeing how bad they are, and then you're like, all right, you're bad enough, you want to come work for the real bad guy. So I mean, it's a really interesting employment method, but it kind of, I don't know, there's a weird contradictory nature to it of I get that it's meant to come off as intimidating and it doesn't, and maybe that's by design. So it's a really interesting dynamic at work there.
Yeah. And so this is a bit of real history that I think is probably irrelevant to the book, but it wasn't a new idea. Basically, starting in 2012, which, it takes a while for books to be published. So realistically, Pynchon was probably not writing the book through 2012. But starting in 2012, there was this project called Cicada 3301 that was various mix of ARG type games and puzzles that were posted on 4chan and other.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I remember this.
Yeah, and other subsurface net websites where basically in the end it's still a little opaque, but at this point it's pretty well decided within the IT sphere, within the conspiracy sphere, within all of the spheres of people who would still be thinking about this, that it was definitely an NSA or CIA or similar intelligence operation hiring mechanism. And the way that fed into what is now QAnon is mind-boggling. So I highly recommend looking into that if anybody is confused about how QAnon came around.
Oh, I didn't know Cicada was linked to that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, QAnon
it's a weird,
masqueraded, yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
As with all things QAnon, it's a real weird connection that is baffling to read about.
Yeah. And so it's one of those things where historically this is a way that people would hire. It just seems very strange to have those kinds of very frat bro-y hey, you think you're tough? You hacked into my honeypot, you dumbass.
It's like the Foot Clan in the Ninja Turtles movie.
Yes.
Welcome to the Rusty Spittoon. How tough are you?
Yeah.
So after that, we move into. Let's see here. Oh yeah, this is where Maxine figures out who gave them, what venture capital firm gave Hogawa their startup money. Turns out they're called Streetlight People, as in
Fucking
Don't
love
Stop
it.
Believing.
Love it.
And it turns out that Streetlight People is run by a man named Rocky Slagiot, who is eating a plastic sandwich when Maxine enters his office. Cody, you seemed to particularly like this character.
This guy is he's a real fun dude to read. Yeah, he's just like this like hyper stereotypical Italian mob wannabe. Like he watched The Godfather too many times and just took away all the worst parts of it and has built a persona around it. I love this part of it, but I love it more when he's at the Italian restaurant. That's my favorite part of his.
That part is great. I thought that potentially this was a case where like freaking what's his name in Vineland?
Ralph Wavone.
Yeah, with Wavone Enterprises.
Yeah.
Where it was a bunch of mob guys who found out that they had to find a way to go legitimate, and so they went into venture capital because that was the only way they could wash their money.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And so now we're a wholly owned subsidiary, and he's just doing that now. But he's paying for these dumb .com companies.
And I just love his. You want something to eat? I can't even my mouth can't make the way he pronounces pepper and egg sandwich.
Oh yeah,
but I can hear it in my head so well.
Crazy. Yeah. Hey, you want something to eat? Pepper and egg sandwich.
It's just like the most marble-mouthed pronunciation.
What was pepper and egg sandwich?
And then Maxine's, what does she refer to it as? Where she's eating it but not eating it.
False eating.
False eating, yeah.
Yeah.
Commercial eating, yeah.
Yeah, I really and the highlights of that dialect writing is where he is transitioning from like what is explicitly described as a Cary Grant into that kind of very East Coast Italian heavy like New Jersey accent is just it's perfect. It feels very, very tangible at the transition point. It's hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's so good. So yeah, we figure out that basically Maxine's hunch is correct. That Gabriel is buying these sort of failing .com companies as a way to route money through them to create these sort of shell corporations where he can hide different payments that he's getting from Palo Alto or various maybe venture capital or maybe other places that hasn't been explored yet, to kind of hide how much money he has and give him more capital to work with. And Rocky sees this as an opportunity for some reason to figure out himself. We don't really know why he wants to, but basically puts Maxine on his payroll. I love that scene too, where he's calling to like his accounts payable department or whatever, and Maxine holds up 5 fingers and he goes, "Yeah, 5,000." And then she's just like,
"Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa,
whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa! No, $500." But we do get a reference of Montauk for the first time. Rocky's been out to dinner with Gabriel Ice a couple of times and is talking about how rich he is. Where it says, "The Hamptons, it figures. Glittering rat hole in summertime home to America's rich, famous, and a vast seasonal inflow of yup wannabes. Half Maxine's business sooner or later tracks back to somebody's need for the diseased Hamptons fantasy, which is way past its sell-by date now, in case anyone's noticed. In case nobody's noticed. More like Montauk, not even on the beach, back in the woods. We'll eventually go to the woods of Montauk in this book, but as Cody mentioned earlier, the Montauk Project this is most likely the reason why this is the location chosen. It's most likely sort of a hint at this conspiracy theory. There is a former U.S. Air Force base in Montauk called Hero Base, which is probably the dumbest name for a military base that I've ever heard in my life. Hero Base at various times has been kind of referred to as like the Area 51 of the East Coast. It is also associated with this thing called the Philadelphia experiment, where a couple of people claimed that they managed to make a destroyer escort ship teleport from Philadelphia to another portion of the East Coast. I forgot where it was supposed to have gone. Another conspiracy surrounding the Hero Base and Montauk is that this is where all the like Project Monarch stuff happened. That like after these people were like ritually abused, either at Hero Base or somewhere else, they were sent to Hero Base, and the conspiracy there goes that they are then sent back in time to commit assassinations that like edit history in a more favorable outcome for the CIA and for America. But there's also just a lot of allegations from a crackpot conspiracy angle of abuse and experimentation on people going on there. In general, for those who are fans of television, that is sort of the conspiracy inspiration for Stranger Things. The Duffer Brothers, I guess, overheard this story at a party somewhere and decided to change the location of their show to Indiana instead of the Hamptons or Montauk. The working title for Stranger Things is actually just called Montauk. So a lot of the inspiration for like 11 and the conspiracy theories surrounding that in that show comes from this particular type of conspiracy. Another weird thing I found in researching this was something called the Montauk Monster, which was a weird carcass that washed up on the beach there. That if you look at a picture of it, I guess Cody, you can leave a link to it in the show notes. It looks real strange. It looks like some kind of weird monster is the best way that I can put it. And a lot of people have tried to identify what it is, and there's certain aspects of its like physiognomy that don't make sense for the proposed animals. A raccoon, a waterlogged raccoon, is the most likely explanation that people have come up with. Yeah. Additionally, related to Montauk is this idea of Plum Island, which is an island off the coast of Montauk where there was there actually still is a biological research facility there. Conspiracy theorists believe that Building 257 or Lab 257 in Plum Island created Lyme disease.
I forgot about this. Yeah.
Yeah, they created Lyme disease, the West Nile virus, and duck enteritis. So yeah, Montauk is a place where a lot of these conspiracy theories come from and intersect with one another. And it also happens to be where this government-backed Josh Harris analog has his sort of big mansion, summer home kind of a thing. So that's all the details there.
So before we move on, I just wanted to mention.
Yes.
I'm trying to. I cannot find easily, at least, because there are a lot of things published about the Philadelphia experiment and the Montauk Project and all of this. So I'm sure I could find it if I spent enough time. But in pursuit of conciseness, the ship that was supposedly teleported in the Philadelphia experiment seems like it would be intersecting with the arrival of Mason and Dixon into Philadelphia. And I'm just remembering the horrifying scene painted of the sounds that they hear at night while waiting in whatever the bay is, Cape Henlington or Henlopen.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. There. That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Good memory.
Yeah, the supposedly the ship was teleported from the Philadelphia Navy Yard, which I believe is roughly where the docks in Philadelphia would have been in the colonial era. I could be very wrong about that. To Norfolk, Virginia, which would just be straight across Delaware, really.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, these books are all connected to one another, as we've continued to say. Yeah, so then they go have lunch at an Italian restaurant, where a interesting interaction between the waiter and Rocky happens. Do you want to read that quote, Cody, since you're such a fan?
I can. I was gonna. I actually might save that for our funny part.
Okay, yeah, no worries.
Yeah. We'll save that for that.
Yeah, so they go to Enrico's Italian kitchen. I do love the inclusion that the waiter, whose credits include a couple Sopranos episodes,
Yeah,
recognizing this for what it is, stands by, trying not to roll his eyes too much. I love that. And then essentially they just sort of have lunch with one another, and there's a reference to Lucky Luciano in the OSS. That's another real history reference. Lucky Luciano helped connect the military with mafia connections in Sicily prior to the U.S. invasion of Sicily. And then Vito Genovese helps secure the docks on the East Coast to make sure that no strikes by the dock workers union would happen over the course of World War II, so that no supplies were lost as they were shipped out. But that's where we kind of end chapter 6. Is Maxine has her $500, and she is about to go continue her investigation into what's going on with Hashlingers and Gabriel Ice against her better judgment. Anything else we want to say about chapter 6 before we wrap up?
I love the character development of Mr. Slajat, I think is how it's pronounced.
Slagiat?
Slajat. Because you're in Italian. In Italian, you merge the I and whatever letters afterwards. If it's
I don't think this guy's actually Italian.
No,
this is more of a
but he
Brad Pitt
but he calls it
Inglourious
fajoule,
Basterds.
and it's anyway. Slajat, I think. Anyway, the moment where he says, one thing to build a house with its foundation in the sand, right? Something else to pay for it with money not everybody believes is real. I Ching talk. She noticed. A boat. How about a boat? They own a boat? At least one, maybe. Ocean going? What am I, Moby Dick? Whether it's a joke or whether it's an actual bit of his character, I love the idea that this guy reads the I Ching enough to actually know what it to like quote from it, but he doesn't know enough about Moby Dick to know that it's a whale.
That's a good point.
That is. I didn't clock that joke. That's really good.
Because whether it's a character choice or it's just a joke on the character's part, it's pretty great.
That is.
All right. I think that takes us to, fittingly, to funny parts. Any of them that we haven't already brought up over the course of these 3 chapters?
I mean, mine is the Rocky in the Italian restaurant.
Now's your time to shine.
That one just killed me. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and read it. I'm not even going to attempt to do the Italian because, Jesus, I will land in a world of shit for how bad my Italian accent would be. This was on page 65 and 66. They go around the corner to Enrico's Italian kitchen, which she recalls getting raves in Zagat. Jesus, I forgot about Zagat too. And find a table. Maxine heads for the ladies' toilet, and on the way back, in fact, while she's still in there, she can hear Rocky and the waiter arguing. No, Rocky, with the sort of evil glee Maxine has noticed also in certain children. Not pasta e fagioli. I think what I said was pasta fazool. Sir, if you look on the menu, it's clearly spelled, pointing helpfully at each word, pasta e fagioli. Rocky gazes at the waiter's finger, deciding how best to remove it from his hand. But ain't I a reasonable person? Of course I am. So let's go to the classical source here. Tell me, kid, does Dean Martin sing, when the stars make you drolly, just like a pasta e fagioli? No, what he sings is, Maxine sits quietly, attending to her eye blink rate, as Rocky from far from Sotto Voce, but on pitch, makes with his Dean Martin impression. Marco, the owner, sticks his head out of the kitchen. Oh, it's you, Che de Cis. Would you care to explain the new guy? He bothering you? 5 minutes. He's in the dumpster with the scungilli shells. Maybe just change the spelling on the menu for him? You sure? Got to go into the computer for that. Be easier just to whack him. The waiter, whose credits include a couple of Sopranos episodes, recognizing this for what it is, stands by, trying not to roll his eyes too much. Maxine ends up having the homemade strozzapreti with chicken livers, and Rocky goes for the ossobuco. Buco, Jesus, I can't talk. Hey, what kind of wine? How about a 71 Tiganello? But then again, with all the wise guy dialogue, maybe just a little Nero Diavola, small glass? Reading my mind. Not exactly doing a double take at the pricey super Tuscan, but a certain gleam has entered his eye, which is what she may have been looking to provoke. And why would that be again? Rocky's mobile phone goes off. Maxine, recognizing the ringtone, is una furtiva lagrima. Listen, my darling, here's the situation. Wait, un gas. I'm talking to a robot here, right? Again. So, how you doing? How long you been a robot? You wouldn't be Jewish by any chance. Yeah, like when you were 13, did your parents give you a bat mitzvah? Rocky just cracks me up. I love that guy.
He's great. That bottle of wine, by the way, is 71 Tegan Yellow's $500.
Jesus. Well, 500, 5,000, he doesn't care.
He does not care. He's got all his money from being a wholly owned subsidiary.
And having worked in various service positions and dealing with people like that, and that waiter's patience but eye rolling at the same time.
Yeah.
100% the proper reaction there.
Definitely. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the existence of a Zin Martini.
Oh God.
Or a Z Martini, I guess maybe it would be the correct way. I guess Zin Martini would be a nicotine martini. But yeah, I've never had a Zima Martini, but I'd be willing to try. It might be too sweet. That with like vermouth in that might be too much. But who knows? I think we went over every other funny part that I had anyway.
I can dig more out, but I will say that you took my choice there, Kate.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Z Martini is just so funny as an idea.
I could also see it being a Churchill martini, where to make a martini you wave a bottle of vermouth in the general direction of France as a sign of respect. So in that way, it's just extra alcohol in a Zima.
Well, in terms of what we haven't mentioned yet, I think I think I'm going to have to say that I love that, and it's going to continue becoming more and more common throughout this book as we get through it. I love the way that Maxine clearly has this like complex around aging into an old Yenta. Mm-hmm. Just the way it's talked about is so funny, because there's so much pride in it, and there's also so much shame, and neither really makes a lot of sense, because it's just being a middle-aged person. It's just hilarious.
Yeah, which of course feeds back to the Yenta Espresso joke from earlier in the book.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, if there's nothing else, that'll take us to quotes. Will, do you want to go first?
So, like I said last episode, this book is one where I struggle to find myself entranced by the language, but I do really love on page 61, just as Maxine is meeting Rocky Slagiet, however you want to pronounce it. Streetlight People is located in a cast-iron front ex-factory space somewhat off the major shopping routes around Soho. Karmic echoes of the sweatshop era, long smoothed away by portable sound breaks, screens, and carpeting, passed into a neutral, unhaunted hush. Buddy Nightingale seeing in a spectrum of hesitant aquas, daffodils, and fuchsias. Brushed nickel workstations custom designed by Zoe Chu, punctuated now and then with black leather bosses chairs by Otto Zapf. I just love the idea of this like new building, this new business building, being full of these incredibly like 50s era color palettes. Mm-hmm. It's there's commentary to mine, but it's also just poetic.
Yeah, for sure. I highlighted that section as well. That's a great passage.
Truly. Cody, what was your quote this time?
So mine is at the end of chapter 5 when Maxine is being tailed. Starting on page 51. Turns out it's Maxine who's their person of interest. Good news, bad news. Driscoll seems like a nice kid and doesn't need these idiots. On the other hand, it's Maxine, now inside a lemon-lime alcopop haze, who has to try and shake them. She gets in a taxi headed down instead of uptown, pretends to change her mind much to the driver's annoyance, and ends up in Times Square, which for a few years now, she has made a conscious effort not to go near if she can help it. The sleazy old deuce she remembers from less responsible youth is no more. Giuliani and his developer friends and the forces of suburban righteousness have swept the place Disneyfied and sterile. The melancholy bars, the cholesterol and fat dispensaries and porno theaters have been torn down or renovated. The unkempt and unhoused and unspoken for have been pushed out. No more dope dealers, no more pimps or three-card Monte artists, not even kids playing hooky at the old pinball arcades. All gone. Maxine can't avoid feeling nauseous at the possibility of some stupefied consensus about what life is to be, taking over this whole city without mercy, a tightening noose of horror, multiplexes and malls and big box stores it only makes sense to shop at if you have a car and a driveway and a garage next to a house out in the burbs. They have landed. They are among us, and it helps them to no end that the mayor with roots in outer boroughs and beyond is one of them. That's, if you want to idealize gentrification as a Lovecraftian horror concept, that's it right there.
Yeah.
It is so wonderfully written and so depressing to read, having witnessed that kind of thing happening. It's such a great combination of that noirish description of a city and the condemnation of the change of that city for the worse, and that Lovecraftian kind of horrific creation hiding behind all of it, which again, as we've talked about with Vineland and Lot 49 and everything else, like Pynchon is so good at using that sort of Lovecraftian horror to make a monster of the earth, of parts of the planet, and to imbue them with that supernatural horror that I can't really think of any other author who can do that as well.
I love that you brought that up, the supernatural like horror element of it, because there are some people who, looking at the 9/11 angle, talked about like 9/11 is like the like literal hole in the building as being like a portal to hell. Like this was, and like that it looked like an eye of evil. Like I distinctly remember the eye thing. A lot of people bringing up that it looked like this evil eye there that some people were saying was like the eye of the devil or opening out into hell of some kind. So yeah, there is something about that definitely within the context of how he animates the city that even has some real life analog, and how some people on the more woo-woo side of things saw that event. I picked my quote from page 42, where Maxine is about to go into the Hagawa offices. Where it says, Maxine approaches the address from the other side of the street, and as soon as she catches sight of it, her heart, if it does not sink exactly, at least cringes more tightly into a one-person submarine necessary for cruising the sinister and labyrinthian sewers of greed that run beneath all real estate dealings in this town. Thing is, it's such a nice building. Terracotta-facing, not as ornate as commercial real estate could get a century ago when this unit was going up, but tidy and strangely welcoming, as if the architects had actually given some thought to the people who'd be working there every day. But it's too nice. Sitting duck, asking to get torn down someday soon, and the period detailing recycled into the decor of some yup's overpriced loft. The directory in the lobby lists Hagawa up on the 5th floor. Maxine knows old school fraud investigators who will admit to walking away at this point, satisfied enough only to regret it later. Others have advised her to keep going no matter what, until she can actually stand in the haunted space and try to summon the ghost vendor out of its nimbus of crafted silence. On the way up, she watches floors flash by out of the porthole in the elevator door. Folks in workout gear gathered by a row of snack machines, artificial bamboo trees framing a reception desk of wood blonder than the blonde stationed behind it. Kids in school jackets and ties sitting blank-faced in the waiting area of some SAT tutor or therapist or combination thereof. She finds the door wide open and the place empty. Another failed.com joining the office-scape of the time. Tarnished metallic surfaces, shaggy gray soundproofing, steel case screens, and Herman Miller work pods almost beginning to decompose, littered, dust gathering. Well, almost empty. From some distant cubicle comes a tinny electronic melody Maxine recognizes as Korobushka, the anthem of 90s workplace fecklessness, playing faster and faster and accompanied by screams of anxiety. Ghost Fender indeed. As she entered some supernatural time warp where the shades of office layabouts continued to waste unaccountable person hours playing Tetris. Between that and solitaire for Windows, no wonder the tech sector tanked. I love that whole description right before she meets Driscoll. Just the way that it kind of unfolds in this procedural element of not just... Because, at the beginning of those paragraphs, she starts outside the building. And then at the end of it, she's about to meet Driscoll. And just the way that he kind of keeps peeling away these different layers, first from the outside of the building and what that means to the city, what that means to the gentrification that's occurring, to the cosmic horror kind of idea that you're talking about, Cody, to going inside the building and then seeing the parts of it that are still alive and this part of it that's died from this sort of upheaval of money that's taken place recently, and then finally going inside and just kind of seeing the ruins of a late stage capitalist hellscape, punctuated only by the game of Tetris, which has its own sort of history applied to it of how that came to be a game, how it got licensed, and how it got brought over to the U.S. and the kind of capitalistic aspects of that, and how the founder of it was screwed out of the money. It's really good. I love it so much, and it's just such a pitch perfect sort of detective hard boiled thing that's unfolding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was definitely probably my runner up for favorite section.
It's a great one. Well, what do we have for most pinch on part of the chapter?
Mine is the wave of anti-capitalist and anti-real estate sentiments that run through these three chapters. I know they run through all of his work, and I really enjoy, as someone who shares those views, it's always reaffirming to hear someone put it more eloquently than I can. So I really appreciate those parts, and it really reminds me of part of what really hooked me on his work was that I was able to find someone that could express how I felt about that kind of stuff better than I was able to do.
Will, what about you?
I see I'm having a hard time choosing between two little parts, but I think I'll go with what I read as like a flip of the trope of a lawyer saying, "Hey, give me $1. Seriously, give me $1. Before you say anything, give me $1." With Rocky and Maxine, where he's just handing her $5,000. And her just being like, "Seriously? That's not I'm not looking for a payoff. I'm looking for an establishment of business."
Yeah.
That's pretty great.
I think mine would be the Jennifer Aniston section of taking this like real world thing that occurred that was pretty crazy, but then amplifying it up to 11 to transfer over to this whole thing with the slaughtering of the chicken for a facial.
Yeah.
Yeah, that just really strikes me as something only he could come up with. Well, that does it for this episode. We did, however, get a listener comment from a Reddit user, CCB2553. Cody, do you want to read that out?
Sure. It says, "I've really been digging the podcast so far. Appreciate what y'all do. I've been reading Bleeding Edge the past few weeks and love it so far. I'm 28, so I'm much more familiar with the time and place this novel is set in compared to the previous Pinch-On books you've covered. By no means saying that makes it his best book, but it's on its way to becoming one of my favorites. Lot 49 has a reputation of being the best gateway into Pinch-On, but I have the feeling that younger generations find this easier to grasp. As with all the Pinch-On I've read so far, the jokes are consistent and so good that you always want to start the next section. Chapter 16 made me laugh out loud in several places, most notably involving a horrifying improv set. I've also enjoyed the bonus episodes y'all have been putting out. Death in Her Hands is a severely underrated book and clearly Moshfeg's best. Happy to see it get some shine. The Patternist series sounds insane in the best way. Always appreciate the little recommendations here and there. Can't wait to listen tomorrow. Really appreciate that. Thank you. I'm glad that you're enjoying Bleeding Edge, and there's definitely a lot to love about it. I do think it is probably one of the better gateway books into his work. And I'm also glad that you're enjoying the bonus episodes. We like, as much as we love discussing Penchon, it is nice to break away and talk about other stuff that we really are passionate about and really into. So we're happy that that's being enjoyed by so many of y'all as well.
Yeah, and thank you for agreeing with me on Moshfeg's work. Death in Her Hands is an excellent book, and yeah, I don't know why. I think it just got overshadowed by the book that came out before it and the book that came after it. Just kind of skated underneath everyone's radar, but it shouldn't have. It's really good. Well, that does it for chapters 4 through 6. We will be back next week, same bat time, same bat channel, and we'll be going through chapters 7, 8, and 9 as we continue our journey towards the end of history. Until next time, thanks everybody for listening.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. I have very vivid memories of downloading of trying to get music off of LimeWire.
Jesus fucking Christ.
On my parents' gateway computer.
What a gamble that was.
Yeah, exactly.
Time.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Are you going to get what you're spending 8 days downloading?
That's exactly what I was going to say. Like, these vivid memories of waiting days for this thing to finish downloading, in which your parents couldn't use the phone.
Yeah.
And then when it finally finishes downloading, it's just it's like just a snuff film or porn.
Someone's Red Hot Chili Peppers cover band.
Yeah, exactly. It was the worst. Worst.
I have to ask a question. Once again, I am a literal baby speaking to you. Having not used LimeWire, but having used other file sharing networks.
Mm-hmm.
Did it even have resume download? Because I can only imagine waiting for days to download a song and it just failing, because that's how dial-up was.
It would fail a lot. I don't recall if it had a resume option or not. I would imagine if it didn't, I would have given up quicker on it than I did. I think the bigger frustrating part of it was just these horrendously mislabeled files that it really, as someone who I just wanted to get into more music and didn't have the money to go buy an $18 CD and didn't want to get caught stealing again, I would have no other choice but to try and download random stuff on there. But the problem was what I was into was so eclectic that it either wasn't available or it wasn't fully, the full album wouldn't be available. People would only make a few songs available here and there. So it was just this maddening. Having lived through that makes you really appreciate streaming services a little bit more.
Yeah, 100%. I wish I could remember if it had a pause download feature. I feel like it must have.
I think it did, but it definitely wasn't worth doing, because a lot of times if you gave up that momentum, it would take a while for it to get back up to the 56K.
For it to rebuffer.
Yeah, so it was just really a matter of I would always download stuff. I would start it at 9 p.m. with the hopes that it would be done in the morning and I wouldn't have to fight with my sister or my parents about the phone.
Did you ever get to the point where you had a second phone line in your house for the internet?
We did, yeah. We had an upstairs phone line for that, but that conflicted with my sister and I's personal lives because I couldn't call my at the time girlfriend, now wife, and she couldn't call her friend. So it was always that thing of you're on the phone with somebody and then you hear that horrendous screeching sound when someone's trying to get online. It was what a weird. It's really just. It's funny how quickly we've put that part of history out of our minds, even though it was a huge part of our growing up.
Yeah, I
that's for
remember
sure.
the huge excitement in my parents when they got DSL.
Oh man, I was envious of anyone who had DSL as a kid.
It was a big deal. I had no
Yeah.
clue why, but
Yeah, that was a big day in our house. We still chugged along with that gateway with an 8 GB hard drive for years afterwards, but
who
big
would
day.
ever need more than
Yeah.
400 megabytes?
Hey, I remember having when I first started making music and recording it and saving it all on floppy disks and having to like cut off huge parts of songs that were too big to fit on the disc.
Yeah, I remember doing that too. I still have some floppy disks somewhere. I don't know what's on them, but I know I
Never
still
know.
have them.
A mystery
even-
locked in time.
I don't even have a way of reading those anymore.
Yeah, I learned how to use. Sorry, don't know when I cut out there. I learned how to use floppy disks and then just never used one in my entire life.
I mean, it sounds about right.
Weren't missing out on much.
When they went away real fast.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it went from like floppy disks in the mail to AOL disks just overnight.
Littering every trash can in the world. Yeah.
Good old AOL minutes discs.
Here's 500 of them with your hamburger.
It's so great, yeah. Or you get them at the grocery store. That was where we used to get ours.
Yep.
Speaking of spam, on multiple levels, and scam and spam.
Yeah.
Right. And then
I have to ask, since you're the only person I know who likes Zima or liked Zima,
yeah.
did you ever drink it out of a glass?
Like pouring it out of the glass bottle into a
frosty mug.
I can't say that I have. I think I've only ever drank it out of the bottle.
Okay, just curious.
I don't think it's able to pour out of it. I think it only exists in the bottle. And if you try to pour it out, it just like stops being a physical thing.
It goes back into whatever ether good ideas come from. Yeah, bring back Zima. Maybe I can get it imported.
If this podcast accomplishes nothing else, we need to bring back Zima and Crystal Pepsi.
Yeah, just for us.
I thought Crystal Pepsi was still around with that.
It came back for a little bit.
For whatever reason, they brought back Zima, Surge, and Crystal Pepsi like the same time. Yeah. And the only one that I think is still around is Surge. I think you can still get Surge now at stores.
It was like a 20th anniversary thing, I think, because it was like it was right around 2020, 2019.
Yeah, it was like late 2010s.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I went to the gas station. I would buy every Crystal Pepsi I could find and just take it home because I was like, I know this is not going to last. I have to get them now.
What was even better about drinking Crystal Pepsi is I think it was made more magical by the fact that you knew that it wasn't supposed to look like that. Yeah. And so you would take a sip of it and you're like, man, this tastes like a dark cola, but it doesn't look like that. That's amazing.
It's a magic trick in my mouth.
Exactly. I think that was actually their slogan for a while.
It probably was, yeah.